So microgrids are included in that third element. It's a way in which the power system will become more dispersed and operated in a more localized way. Microgrids are a way of organizing loads and resources more locally and maybe aggregating those loads so they present themselves to the grid as some sort of organized package. And this makes the whole system where you have many, many resources, many of them very small, like rooftop PV systems or electric vehicle charging and so on, makes it much more manageable for you to be able to handle all of those small capabilities than trying to do it all in a very centralized way. And you can sort of picture that yourself. California has one central control center. It's called CAISO, which covers 70 to 80% of all the electricity consumed in the state, up to about a 50 gigawatt peak load. That's 50,000 megawatts. You can imagine how difficult it would be for them to have enough screens to be able to see what's happening to all of the PV systems, all of the electric vehicles, all of the wind turbines, etc. So microgrids are a way in which those resources can be managed locally. And that is both a technical way, but it's also an economic way, because the microgrid could be an actor in wholesale markets at the kind of scale that's not very different than the very small ones that we have now. So rather than a homeowner trying to sell his few kilowatts of power, excess power, into the wholesale market, the microgrid would be able to aggregate many PV arrays, many other resources, and get it to the minimum size that can currently participate in those markets. And that's usually about 1 megawatt. About 1 megawatt is usually the minimum size for a wholesale supplier. You should also note that the microgrid can be a very smart actor in that market, because locally it should be able to integrate the resources that it has, control some loads, particularly things like EV charging and so on, manage the local resources like PV wind, and maybe use other resources like storage, and put all of those together into a package which is going to be something hopefully more useful to the grid in terms of its size and operational capabilities, but also something more useful to the grid in terms of being a lot more predictable. That the microgrid can have some contingencies so that when the sun's not shining, for example, it has some other way of supplying the resource that it has promised to the grid in a way that an individual PV array would not be able to do. So this is where microgrids fit in and interconnect with the smart grid. And just make a special note of electric vehicles, because I'm a believer myself that electric vehicles might be a big game changer. One reason is they're pretty big load. Another is that they're mobile. So they occur in different places at different times. But one that's very exciting to power engineers is that it is a battery. And batteries are very valuable assets in a system. And so being able to access the vehicle battery, not only to charge it for its normal on-road use, but to be able to use it as a source of storage to the grid, is something that could be enormously valuable. Again, it's a pretty small resource, so managing all that centrally would be a very big operational challenge, but a microgrid would be able to use those electric vehicles effectively. Another point about electric vehicles is that they could be a kind of economic actor. They can charge and discharge, so they could charge up under some circumstances, go to a different location, and then discharge. This is something that could also be very valuable to grids, because the electrical loads tend to be where the people are. So when they're in their offices and factories during the day, the electric vehicle could be serving that load locally. But then at night, when they're back at home, then the electric vehicle could be serving the home residential load. So electric vehicles have this interesting property of kind of following the load around.